Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I am Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones, and I'm excited to be with you again. This is resuming our translation notes series, which was on hold over the Christmas holiday and New Year's, and also last week. And so we're back at it now, looking at Mark 13:5 through 8. Beware that no one deceive you. So I welcome you and thank you for being here. We'll take just a moment to orient ourselves to some information that I think might be helpful for you. The first is that this handout that you see on my screen, if you're here live, that's available to you in the Go to Webinar Control Panel. And you can just click that open and download it, print it out, whatever you want to do. Also, if you're here live, that means you registered, and so you'll automatically get an email after today's session with this handout attached to it. So we try to be a little redundant there, and you will get a recording as well. We're recording today. You may be watching this on a recording, and if that's the case and you need the handout, everything from this series is here at tinyurl.com/Mark Translation Notes. That will take you to a shared Google Drive folder. I've heard of folks having some lag time on some browsers, so it's all there, but you just have to scroll down, let it load, and you'll get this handout and everything else that we've covered in Mark 2. And my email address is here, abramkj@accordancebible.com. If you've got a question or a comment, I welcome them always. That you can use the questions box. It's like a one-way typed chat. I see those questions. I may respond individually, or if it seems like it's a question or comment for the group, then I'll share that anonymously with everyone. I think that covers it. Let me know if you have other questions as we get started. But again, that questions box is probably the main thing you need to find to be able to communicate with me. And anytime you have a question, ask it. I won't necessarily respond right away, but I will check everything from time to time. All right, we're in Mark 13, and it heats up a little bit today in terms of the interpretive challenge. And so I do just want to reiterate that my goal with this series is to translate well from Greek to English and to use accordance as our primary tool for that, or I guess it's a sort of presenter of tools, because we're going to be accessing Greek texts and commentaries and sometimes grammatical diagrams and lexicons, but the idea is, how do you use accordance in this act of translation? So inevitably, questions of interpretation come up. In fact, to translate is to interpret. There will be some bigger questions of interpretation that we will at least allude to today, but I think my goal is more to work on the translation side, maybe equip all of us to do our own interpretation. Not that I'm opposed to talking about it, and that has come up in multiple webinars already, but I do want to keep the focus on translation as much as possible. So really where this kind of comes to a head is where Jesus talks about the end today. And so we'll see that, and we will talk about how do we translate that, what might this mean, how might we interpret this. In the end, I tend to favor a more cautious translation, and then recognize that there may be varying interpretations, and that's especially true with Mark 13. All right, so here's 13:4. This is from last week, and I just want to orient us with this. The four disciples say to Jesus, "Epon humin, pate tauta estai, kai ti ta semean, hatan mele tauta suntelestai panta." Again, we had this last time, but we'll pick up again here. They say, "Tell us," talking to Jesus, "when will these things happen? And what will be," there's an implied verb there, "what will be the sign all these things are about to be fulfilled?" Peter and the disciples twice ask about tauta, these things. So we've got tauta, and then we've got tauta, panta, all these things. And we want to ask, what things are they talking about? This is almost an easy translation decision, because I think if you have these in the text in Greek, I want to have these in the text in English. It doesn't answer the question of what are the these, but in translation, that's straightforward enough. We still want to know what things, And we saw this last time. This actually also, I think, has an easy answer, at least on one level, because the close referent here is the destruction of the temple. That's where this all started out. In fact, let me open up Accordance here, and we'll just do this in English for now. But Jesus has said, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left on another. All will be torn down." And then Peter, James, and John and Andrew ask him, "When will these things happen?" Namely, what Jesus says in verse 2. So again, there's an answer there. The destruction of the temple, and we talked last time about this, about the plural here, these things. To say that the temple is destroyed is a this thing. That's a single event, and so we could expect a singular this. But I quoted France last time, and here's another commentary that says the idea with these things is that it's talking about a complex of events, as this commentary says, associated with the destruction. France talked about the process that was signified by tauta, these things. And I mentioned here that there are potential interpretive challenges. I will probably at least dip into these a little bit every week, and I always welcome your questions and especially your insights. Maybe by the end of the chapter, we'll have we will not have clarity as to all of the whens and whats of this passage, but I hope we'll have a sense, first of all, of how to translate it well. Second of all, what are the different ways people have understood this in the history of interpretation, and how might we understand it? But we get now Jesus's response, and this is where we pick up today, starting in verse 5 and all the way through the end of the chapter. So we're going to get an extended discourse now. And I mentioned this verse again, just so that we remember what it is that Jesus is responding to. Now, we know by now in Mark 13, or maybe from other reading or experience in life, that Jesus has a tendency to answer the question that he wants to answer, or he'll answer a question with a question. So on the one hand, it's entirely possible, because he also does answer questions directly, it's entirely possible Jesus will answer this question straight up. And it's a two-part question. When will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they're about to be fulfilled? In other words, when and how will we know when, kind of in advance, what sign? Jesus, in fact, is not going to directly, at least I don't think, answer these questions. So in verse 5, we get his initial response, "Beware that no one deceive you," which again is very difficult to construe as a direct answer to these questions. But that's not a surprise. Jesus knows what he is about, and so we're going to see that in full measure in this chapter. Let me go to Accordance for 13:5, and we'll look at this a little bit more. I'm going to open up Greek text, make that nice and big to see. Mark 13:5. All right. Ha de Jesus erxeta legen autois, blepete me tis humas planese. That's what we have so far. Left to right, it's something like, and or but Jesus began to speak to them. See to it, or look, or watch, or beware that no one, so no one, you deceive. So beware that no one deceive you. France notes in his commentary, R.T. France, that this erxeta legen, he says it alerts the reader to expect a substantial discourse, which in fact is going to be the case. And I would not kind of reduce this to a translation like, "and Jesus said to them," even though that's true. There may be a reason that Mark has the "began to say" rather than Jesus just said. So I think we want to bring that out in translation. France says this is essentially a marker that something long is going to follow. And you could search this yourself, and I'll just use this as a little bit of an excursus because I did this and I was curious. I read France, and he said Jesus, essentially Jesus does this. So you can take this phrase, "began to speak." you can right click and search for, and I would do the lexeme just to get as broad coverage as possible. And then you can go in here and just start typing range and get the quick entry, or there's a keyboard shortcut. You can also do that from the search menu, enter command range. And I would just narrow that down to Mark, although I can see it on my screen. So this does not appear to be a common expression. And in fact, here it's used of Peter. Peter began to say to him. So it turns out, and I only know this from playing with the search already, that what we probably want to do is consider other discourse verbs. So if France is saying, and there's some other commentary somewhere else that I thought I saw that said this happens a number of times in Mark. If the statement in the commentary is that Jesus or Mark uses this to introduce long dialogues, it would just be nice to see that. And here's yet another reason to learn Greek so that we can evaluate what our commentaries say. In this case, there are not many instances, and the only other one is not used of Jesus. And so what I'm going to do here is replace speak, because it could be that began to teach or began to answer is what's included here. And so for this, I'm going to even just bracket verb. Well, I'll just do any verb. We'll just leave it like that. And that's not going to be all speech verbs, but you can see already that they are. Began to proclaim, began to teach. So there's 4-1, and in fact, that is what Mark or what France mentions here. So this is just a little bit of a case study in how we interact with our commentaries. Having read France, I was expecting to see, excuse me a second. I was expecting to see ersata legen all over the place. I did not, but there is ersata didaskein, or ersanta parakalein, kerusein. Here's didasko again. This is throughout the book. So if you wanted to run that search yourself, I put this in the handout. It would be something like arco for begin, verb infinitive, or even just verb range mark. That's the search, and then you can look through those results if you want to verify that claim. But we know it's true here because we can scroll through and see Jesus is going to say a lot here. So Jesus began to say to them, autois, that's Peter, James, John, and Andrew. France helps us look ahead, and he says that these words are addressed specifically to the 4 disciples, legen autois, to them, but 37 will extend their scope to all. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that now, or even in my own personal study, I wouldn't, although I would, again, be curious and want to see verse 37. So I might even just open up a parallel English. What I say to you, I say to everyone, stay alert. So there's a broadening out by the end of the chapter. We'll look at that when we get to that verse. All right, let's talk about the content of what Jesus says here, because this is the beginning of this long speech, and we don't know for sure that it's going to be his thesis statement. I mean, he could start with a story or an anecdote or just another proposition, but presumably the first thing he says is going to be important regardless. So I want to look at that closely. Blepete me tis humas planese. See to it that no one deceive you or deceives you. This is a subjunctive, and there's a number of ways you could translate this, all of which would convey the same meaning. The SIL Exegetical Summary Series has watch out lest someone deceives you. That's in their interlinear translation. Planese is aorist active subjunctive, third person singular. And BDAG, if we triple click on that, that's my default lexicon, so that will take me right to BDAG. And you can set, and let me know if you have questions about this, but you can set your lexicons to also, when you run a word search, to also look for the reference from which you are searching the word. So I'm in Mark 13:5. I want to know what blepo means, and if BDAG lists Mark 13:5, that would also be super useful, because maybe this word not just maybe, this word could have different nuances depending on the passage. And so if that verse is there, it will show up. That's in your settings. And in fact, it does have Mark 13:5. So I scroll down and see BDAG puts it under meaning number 5. Be ready to learn about something that is needed or is hazardous. And then in italics, these translation equivalents, watch, look to, beware of, and here is Mark 13:5. I just note in the handout that you can search BDAG with reference. You could even, and I found myself doing this too, I note here that it's blepo with planese with the subjunctive. So maybe apart from their mentioning this verse, maybe you want to look for blepo with the subjunctive. And you could scan through this. It's not a long entry, but you could also save yourself some time and go to this second search field. I would just do all English just to cover everything and type in SUBJ, stop there. 2 hits, so the 1 hit is blepo, the second hit is subjunctive, scroll down, and it's there. And in fact, this is the same paragraph that I'd already found, but if it hadn't listed the reference, now I could get to this, because this is what we have. It's blepo with the subjunctive, and this note's here, followed by may, which is exactly what we have here, or you could have some other negative particles, and aorist subjunctive, check, and then some references here. In that case, it means beware or look out. So I've translated this as beware, not just watch, but watch out. And you can hear even in English, there's a little bit of a difference there. Watch versus watch out. Not just look like a passively, like you passively view something, like you watch with concern and kind of a mind for your safety and a readiness to act or something like that. Beware, I think, sums that up just fine in English, but you do have other options. The NET note here gives us be on guard, which I think is good too. That it doesn't speak to the eyes per se in the way that watch or see does, but I think the eyes here are really just kind of a precursor to the action here, which is that have caution, be alert. There are a number of great translations you could do here, all of which I think, as long as they convey this idea of being alert and ready, but also cautious. I think something like that is what you want to put in your translation. So why or of what should you be cautious of? Planao is the verb here. Deceive. Beware that no one deceive you. Watch out so that you may not be deceived. I mean, just, again, any number of ways you could do smooth English here. We don't use the subjunctive as much in English as we used to, so you want to think about that. But BDAG gives this as to cause to go astray from a specific way. And Lonida gives us to cause someone to hold a wrong view and thus be mistaken to mislead. So you have some options here too. And I think, you know, Greek, I've said this before, Greek to English or any language to any language is not a one-to-one proposition. It's not like, you know, a decoder ring or like a puzzle where you match a symbol to a letter and then once you crack the code, you get it exactly. And there's only one solution. And I think planao is a great example here. And in English, we have multiple words that would mean the same thing: deceive, mislead. Maybe mislead feels a little soft to you, like a little bit of a euphemism. Deceive, maybe more direct. But as we go on, we're going to see that this is not an innocent, like, oops, I accidentally gave you the wrong directions to get to my house. This is much more deliberate. So you may need to work your way through the next verse before you're clear on how you want to translate planao. But I think deceive is good here. But it does have that meaning that it's not just the sense of tricking someone, like you get them to answer wrong, but there's something almost more bodily or whole life with it. And BDAG brings that out, to cause to go astray from a specific way. And so this is why Jesus says, beware, watch out, because what is at hand here is deception, and it's deception that can take someone down a dangerous path. This is just an overview of these two words lexically. These are the only two lexicons. You could look at this in further lexicons. What you really, I think, would want to do for a word study is take this word. In fact, you can do this with live click very quickly. I'm going to do word usage, and I'm going to click on planese. And I'm going to open up my NA28, and it would be beneficial. We can add that range again here just to see, does Jesus use this word elsewhere, or do others use this word in Mark? And sure enough, it's here in 24 and 27, which is interesting. It's kind of in the vicinity. So deception has already been discussed. It could be useful to consider that as you're looking at the meaning here, but I will stop there because we have more words and more verses that we want to look at. But again, my translation here, and Jesus began to say to them, just to confirm, I want to keep that began there, beware that no one deceive you. And he's going to elaborate on that. Verse 5 does not, it really connects to verse 6, so it's kind of an artificial stopping point, but I'm going to make it one anyway because I want to stop and check in with you and see what comments or questions you've got so far on verse 5 especially, or even we looked at verse 4 to catch us up, but what comments or questions do you have on either anything covered or anything not covered from this verse? I see a comment here. I will put this anonymously into the chat. Somebody says, excellent idea to confirm commentary statements and even confirm lexicon. Blepo and BDAG meaning number 5 to learn seems awfully weak. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's easy for me to think about a commentary as being an interpretation. I mean, I think that's just kind of generally understood. Even very careful ones, ones that are very judicious and so forth. Lexicons, I tend to think of not as much that way. Like if you are arguing with somebody or discussing with somebody what a word means and you go look it up in the dictionary, that's often seen as like, well, that settles it. But with these lexicons, I think it is important to remember even there's a piece of interpretation involved. And so, yeah, thanks for affirming that. And, obviously you could spend all day verifying every word by doing a complete word search yourself. I mean, at some point, you want to make sure your resources you use are trustworthy. And I find BDAG, as many have, to be very reliable, but remembering that, yes, there is an interpretive element to it. Yeah, and so your point here that learn is maybe a little soft, and yeah, it's again watching out in the sense of like watch out and be ready to get out of the way or block that person or say no. So it's a little bit more active than just to kind of look out your window and keep an eye on this. All right, let's move on to verse 6. Thanks for that good comment, and if you all have more comments or questions, let me know. We will do verses 6 and 7 today, I anticipate, and at least look at verse 8. But let's go to verse 6. So Jesus began to say to them, beware that no one deceive you. Paloi elusantai epito onamati mu. Many will come in my name, legantes, saying, hati, quote, ego eimi, I am he. Kai palus, and many planesusin, and many they will deceive. So I've translated it this way: many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and they will deceive many. Of course, this is talking about people. So you could say, many people will come in my name, saying, I am he, and they will deceive many people. If you can identify a more specific class than people, you could put that in translation. I would not do that here because it's not clear what kind of people, but something like many would-be leaders will come in my name, but even that to me feels like over-interpreting. It is to say, though, that paloi, the kind of straight translation is many, but of course it's talking about people. So you would be very well justified, I think, to bring that out in translation. I've just left it like this. Many will come in my name, saying I am he, and they will deceive many. So we've got the same verb, planao. We had beware that no one deceive you, planese. And then many will be deceived, plane. I'm sorry, that's wrong. Many, they will deceive many. I need to fix that. Let me just, pardon me a moment. I'm going to update this in the email you get later, and the Google Drive will be updated shortly after this. Beware that no one deceive you, and they will deceive many. I had the voice wrong there. However you translate the verb in verse 5, I would do the same here. So if you landed on something like mislead or trick or lead astray or whatever it was, you would want the same one here, just because it's really talking about the same action, the same group of people, the same dynamic. It's two verses right next to each other. So that's just a kind of typical consistency check that we would want to do. So again, I'll update this. Beware that no one deceive you, and they will deceive many. We can see here that paloi is the subject. It's in the nominative case. See that oi ending there. You can also confirm this in accordance. Masculine plural nominative. And then palus with that us ending is masculine plural accusative. So it is many who are doing the deceiving, the actors, and many that they are deceiving. So the receptors, both subjects and objects. In short, it's many will deceive many. Many people will deceive many people, which I just thought that kind of a chaotic picture. The image here is one of deception and leading astray all over the place, by many, of many. So there's a lot of deception going on. And now we get to see why Jesus used blepete plus subjunctive. See to it that, because there's going to be a lot of it. So you really need to be, or maybe you favor be on guard or something like that. It's going to be all over the place. That's the image that we get of deception. Now we might pause here and just check in and say the disciples had asked, back to their questions, when will these things happen and what will be the sign they will be fulfilled? Jesus has not explicitly said anything about the temple being destroyed. It may be that this deception is going to be an answer to the sign question. But we're so far it's looking like we're getting from Jesus not a direct answer to the question as it was asked. So that's obviously we stick with what Jesus is doing and ask, what is Jesus doing? Already I think it's clear that he's not addressing the question explicitly on the terms in which they asked it. And so I just hold that out because I think that does bear on how do we interpret the passage. It's not to say this never talks about the destruction of the temple. It is to say Jesus, for whatever reason, has shifted the focus, as he did even early in verse 1, away from the building and on to this, I guess, what he sees as maybe a more important issue, or at least one that he chooses to highlight, which is deception. All right, many will, it just says elusantai epito anamati mu. And again, left to right, it's not a hard translation question, I don't think. Many will come in my name. But I think we just want to note that what they're doing is they're claiming to come in Jesus's name. They're not actually coming in his name. And Jesus isn't saying they're actually there in his name, or on his behalf, or on his account, or what. That's what they're saying. And the reason we know that is because they are saying then, ego e me, I am he, and they're not. They will deceive many. So they're claiming to come in Jesus's name. They will come bearing Jesus's name, but falsely. And this is a decision to make in translation. Is this already in your mind for whoever you're translating for, which might just be you, or it may be a small group or something broader? Is that already clear? Just bringing it right over into English like this, many will come in my name, saying I am he, and they will deceive many. I think it is, so I've left it as this. But you may want to bring it out more explicitly. The UBS Translator's Handbook gives these possible options: making use of my name. So that really is kind of separating them from the name. They're using it, or you could say claiming my name, calling themselves by my name, or applying my name to themselves. This adds words that per se are not in the Greek text, but it brings out the meaning really well. So you, again, just depending on how you want to translate, what your goals are, your philosophy, you could decide to make that more explicit, or I have not. I've just left it like this, following the Greek as close as possible, trusting that the rest of the statement makes clear they're not actually like sanctioned, like approved to be in Jesus's name. And then we get to what are they saying? Ego eimi. They're saying, I am he. Now, this is an interesting point of translation. I was going to say translation, but also interpretation. This is, you would see ego eimi in Exodus 3 for I am. Jesus uses this too. It could also mean a generic I am that person. So ego eimi does not have to be a divine title, like a claim to a divine title. And I won't belabor this point except to say, if you wanted to look at this more on your own, you could search for, I would do inflected in this case, and look for everywhere where it occurs. Like here, for example, Matthew 14:27, Jesus spoke to them, have courage, it is I, do not be afraid. That, of course, could be the divine title purposely invoked because he is divine and claiming to be so, but it also just carries the ring of like, hey guys, it's me. But here in Matthew 22, it is more of a divine title. But even here in Matthew 26:22, surely not me, Lord, this is disciples. So it could be either, and the way to figure out which one is context. Now, I think I could go either way on this. I've seen commentators that said both. But what's interesting is that regardless, they are, the ego eimi is in reference to Jesus in Jesus's name. So whether you treat this or understand this to be the I am, all caps, all small caps title, you know, Yahweh, the Lord, carried over into the New Testament, whether you look at it that way or not, they are claiming to be divine. There is a claim to divinity here. So I do think this title is probably at least somewhere in the picture. Ego eimi, not just as I am he, I am that person, but as a divine title. Not everyone thinks that, but if you decide that yes, that this is the I am that is being claimed here, you could bring that out in translation too. I am God, I am the Messiah, I am Jesus. Interestingly, the parallel, Matthew 25:5, has ego eimi ha Christos, I am the Messiah. And even our NET text note in this verse will give us I am he, but or that is I am the Messiah. When we translate, we don't necessarily want to bring over synoptic gospel accounts into this one because we want to translate Mark on Mark's terms, which is why I've kept my translation I am he. But if you did think after looking at this some more that this is specifically the divine title, you might even translate it like this: many will come in my name saying I am, and they will deceive many. That's a possibility there. I do note here, UBS Translator's Handbook says, in my name, some difficulty arises from the fact that the phrase ordinarily means on my account, for my sake, in my behalf. Here, however, it seems to demand the meaning representing to be me, as though they were I, since they will say I am he. So it's an interesting phrase, and I saw a question. Yeah, let me use this to, because the question came, and I'll put this in the chat. Somebody says the text uses epi, my name, not in. Might this carry a mimic or copy aspect to his character position? The precise statement is I am rather than I am he. Yeah, so it's interesting here because when this verse starts, I wouldn't expect somebody coming in somebody else's name to say they are that person. Like if you say, I come representing the king, I come bearing news from the king on his behalf as his envoy, as his messenger, you don't then say, oh, and I am the king. That that's like two different identities. So we're at least led to expect that with the coming in the name. So one of two things is happening here. Either this I am he is a surprise, like it's more than just, maybe they start small. They're coming in Jesus's name and now they're claiming to be the Messiah. So that's possible, or this divine title and coming in his name is just conflated in a less precise way. It's difficult for me to know for sure how to go with this. I think the overall point is clear. They're coming with a connection to Jesus, saying they are him, basically, I think is how I read it. But I could be wrong. I think when we look at Matthew, that's interesting, saying I am the Messiah. That's a little bit more explicit there. But yeah, the UBS makes that point that usually this name means on my account, for my sake, in my behalf, representing, which is not the same as saying I am, typically. So that maybe I just raise those questions and leave them there. I welcome any thoughts or comments on that. But the ego in me is pretty strong, whether you take that as divine title or not. And the deception that they are. You know, I think about the angels, how they are messengers. The Bible describes angels as messengers, and in that way stand-ins for God. And like Cornelius, when he sees an angel, addresses the angel as Lord. And at least some translations give that L, capital L, like divine. And so there's like a conflation there between the thing that is a messenger and the thing it represents, or the being that it represents. So maybe that's what's going on here. Hard to say, but certainly the idea here is people are claiming, if not to be the Christ, they are claiming to be at least Christ's lowercase c, or Messiah's, or some connection to Jesus, however close that is. And they're wrong, and they're doing bad things. They're doing damage. They're leading people astray. I'm going to just point out this quote here from the SIL Exegetical Summary Series. You can see here that we are not the first ones to grapple with this. It says the interpretation depends on the nuance expressed in the related phrases "in my name" and "I am he," which is exactly what I was just saying. I've added this emphasis. This is from NICNT. A person coming in my name would ordinarily mean a person claiming to be sent by Jesus, but when that person immediately says, I am he, then in my name signifies that such a person is claiming for himself the title and authority that properly belongs only to Jesus. And then this is how ICC commentary resolves that they would not claim to be Jesus, but they would claim his title of Messiah. So that's another possibility, is that this is a Messiah, lowercase m, not the Messiah like Jesus Christ. I'll stop there because this gets into, I mean, I think you could spend hours trying to study this and understand it, but I'll just stop with Gundry, actually. This is in your handout. He says already Jesus is ignoring the four disciples' question by predicting events that will not signal the immediate destruction of the temple. Because he's going to go on in verse 7 to say, and in addition to the I am he people, the deceivers, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, and don't be alarmed because the end is not yet. In other words, all these things I'm saying to you, they're actually not signs. So Jesus apparently is both not answering the when will these things happen question, and again, apparently, he's not directly answering the signs question, because he's saying, here's some things that you might think are signs, but I'm actually telling you to them because they're not signs, or they're not at least the immediate precursors to the end. And you can see here why this has occupied people ever since it was written as to what and when and who is being discussed here. But Gundry says he's talking about events that will not signal the immediate destruction of the temple. Gundry says, in fact, Jesus will continue to ignore both its destruction and the time of its destruction, and then presumably any signs, in favor of detailed predictions concerning other events. Now we're going to, like I said, we'll dip into this question a little bit every week, and I always welcome your thoughts, but we'll have a chance to revisit this. Gundry says Jesus is using the question of the four disciples as a platform from which to speak on a variety of topics dealing with the future. And that will continue in the next verse, but let me stop there and see if you've got comments or questions on anything. And let me just bring us back to translation. If we are still feeling any degree of uncertainty about how someone could both come in someone's name and claim to be that person, that's okay. Or maybe you don't like the uncertainty, but it doesn't, we don't need to resolve that in translation. That to me is an interpretation question, that it comes from translation, but in translation, I think if there's something that's potentially ambiguous, we're just the translators. You know, it's not that we're not responsible to interpret it, but I think a finished translated product, if there are ambiguities or questions in the original text, then perhaps the finished translated product should bring those over, carry them over. All right, any other comments or questions? And yeah, just to this question somebody asked, you could look at the word epi here and see if that helps shed any light on this. I think you'll still be left with the same challenge, but again, I just bring it out straight up in translation. All right, well, questions and comments, as always, welcome at any time. Let's move on to verse 7. So Jesus continues, kai palus, planesusin, and many they will deceive. Hatan de acusete, when or whenever you hear palemus, well, you've got the day, so and or but, whenever you hear palemus, wars, kai akoas, polemon. So whenever you hear of wars and rumors of wars, reports of wars, me throeste, do not be alarmed. De genesthai, it is necessary to happen. Alupo ta telas, but not yet the end. And ta telas here also is a challenging question of interpretation, not of translation, I don't think, but let's look at it. So here's how I've translated this. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. It is necessary for these things to happen, but the end is not yet. And you could do a word study on throeo, be disturbed or frightened is what we get from BDAG. Let me just triple click that. This does not occur very often. It's just twice, and I think the other use is in the parallel account. Yeah, it sure is. You could even see if this is in the Septuagint and look at it that way. BDAG gives us be inwardly aroused. I would not translate it that way because aroused could have positive or negative connotations. These seem to be, this verb as Jesus is using it has negative connotations. Like, how would you react to hearing about wars or rumors of wars? Like, not very well, you know, like I don't like war. So that's what the connotation this verb carries. And he's saying, don't be that. Don't be alarmed or frightened or disturbed or worked up, or I'm not sure how exactly you'd want to translate this. This could be a good place to check different translations using live click and verse lookup. Just click on the verse reference and see troubled, alarmed, troubled, dismayed, worried, maybe it's a possibility. So something along those lines. All right. De genesthai, it is necessary to happen. And that is what Jesus says. He doesn't really specify the subject, but what it means is it is necessary for these things to happen. So I would probably bring that out in translation, because it doesn't really make sense in English to say it is necessary to happen. You could say something like that needs to happen. And then same thing with alupo ta telas, but not yet the end. But the end is not yet. Another, well, this has a verb in it, but this is a verbless clause. And I think they both need additional English verbs to read smoothly. One question is Jesus describing hearing the wars themselves or hearing about them? And that we could look at the word akuo, and I asked that question because those are two different translations. It's really the same idea, but should I translate this as when you hear wars and rumors of wars, or when you hear about wars and rumors of wars? Max and Mary, in their grammatical analysis of the Greek New Testament, they just kind of say it's either one or the other, and they leave it at that, which is probably good enough for me. The idea being that are you hearing the noise of battle, or are you hearing of battle? Certainly the akoas, either way, the rumors or the reports of the wars, this implies some distance. So it could be that it's both. Like maybe you're hearing the wars themselves and reports of other wars, or maybe it's just hearing of both. This is how I've translated it, and I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on this personally, but it's not immediately clear. So there is at least an initial decision to make there in translation. We get to ta telos, the end. And that seems to be, so far at least, a bit of a climax in Jesus's speech. So when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. It is necessary for these things to happen, but the end is not yet. Ta telos. Is he answering the four disciples' questions? Remember, they had asked, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign all these things are about to be fulfilled? And I won't ask this question every week, because I think pretty clearly the answer is not explicitly, no, he's not. Because these things is the destruction of the temple. And again, at least as far as I can tell, he's not explicitly addressing that. As for signs, and I note this in the handout, Jesus is giving what could be, and certainly have historically been interpreted as signs, false messiahs, deception, wars, etc. But he's saying, and a number of commentaries say this, he's saying that these signs are necessary, but they do not do what signs do, which is point to something else. These signs, or maybe they're not even signs, these events do not signal the end. So it's a counterintuitive thing here, and there's a rich irony here, also pointed out by commentators, that 2,000 years of interpretive tradition would take things like false messiahs and deception and wars and try to then forecast ta telos from that. Not that we shouldn't be on our guard. Jesus says, be on your guard, but there is something ironic about that, because here Jesus is saying, these things are necessary, but the end is not yet. So I think we can infer from that, if the end is not yet, then they're not necessarily signs that point to the end. So kind of an interesting twist here, which again, at this point in Mark, we're not surprised to see Jesus do this. Those of us who are itching to get an answer to the disciples' question have to wait or be content with what we do get in the text and work with that. There are still questions, though, even if these signs or non-signs aren't signaling the end. What is ta telos? Is Jesus conflating ta telos, the end, with the destruction of the temple? So is he answering when he says, it is necessary for these things to happen, but the end, that is to say, the destruction of the temple, is not yet? I think that's possible. In other words, if that's the right interpretation, he would be conflating the end with the destruction of the temple, just using different language for it. And if so, he's circling back to answer their question. I don't think that's what's going on, but I'm still making my way through this chapter anew. And then the other question, of course, that comes up is, what is the end that Jesus describes, and when? So again, just to go back to what I said at the beginning of the session, and welcome your comments and questions and other resources you're finding on this. I want to go back to, as somebody translating this, what does this word mean at a lexical level? I know maybe just, off the top of my head from my vocabulary that ta telos means the end. But I can go deeper than that in translation. And so we'll look at some lexicons here. I'm going to, again, triple click from telos. And BDAG took my reference because I have it set to that. Let me know if you have a question about how to do that. But it found Mark 13:7, which again, it is their interpretation. I'd say very generally trustworthy, really studied interpretation. Still one I want to check in with, but they put that under the second meaning, the last part of a process, close, conclusion. Now look at this, especially of the last things, the final act in the cosmic drama. And then they put Mark 13:7 here with some other references, Luke 21, Matthew 24, which are just parallel accounts. And it would probably be worth making my way through this, although these are journal articles that I may or may not have access to. So clearly people have written about ta telos in Mark 13:7, and these questions that I'm just kind of, I don't want to say blithely raising. I'm not blithely raising them. I'm just raising them. These have been discussed in depth. But BDAG says, it puts it under here, the last part of a process, close or conclusion. Now, you don't have to agree that Mark 13:7 fits there, because another possible meaning for telos is a point of time marking the end of a duration, end, termination, cessation. So it could be the end of something else. And like I said, I don't think this is the case, but it could mean the end of the temple. That is a possible translation, at least so far in this passage. Maybe we see something later that disconfirms that, but back to the handout on this. There is a challenge here either way. So is this talking about cosmic drama? Is he talking about the end in a less cosmic sense? Is he talking about the temple? My approach here, bringing us back to this lexical level, this translation act, my approach tends to be, all right, I don't know, I need to study this more. If I'm presenting this to people, as I'm doing now, I'll present as much evidence as I can, or at least say, here are some directions to go, here's how to get there. In translation, though, I tend to want to be obviously as accurate as possible, but also if there's a way to be interpretation neutral, which is maybe idealistic on my part, because translation always involves some interpretation. But in this case, I'm just going to render it the end. In other words, what I would not do in translation is say, it is necessary for these things to happen, but the end times are not yet. I would not do that personally. If you are 100% convinced that ta telos means the end times, maybe you do that. But even then, maybe you don't. I think just the end is not yet. And as with verse 6, there's some ambiguity there that we're preserving, maybe not resolving. And I, not to hide behind that, but I can make the translation and still leave these questions open. Which are still, I think, open questions for me. This is also a great time. I didn't put this in your handout, but this would be a great time to go to two commentaries in particular. I would look at the SIL Exegetical Summary Series and the UBS Translator's Handbook. So you've got here, when was the end to come? And this says, the disciples were primarily concerned about the end of Jerusalem, with their questions about when these things would be completed. Yet a more distant end may also be in view. So that is from Barclay. And he says also, so it's possible Jesus is talking about the temple and something else. It could be a both and. And then this, we really need to look at the rest of the verses to understand this, and they're all hyperlinked here. But if verses 5 through 23 deal only with the destruction of Jerusalem, then the end refers to the end of God's judgment on Jerusalem. It is more likely, says EBC, that it refers to both the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the age. And then other ones say it refers to the end of the age. So you've got basically what we're seeing here is three primary options. This is the end of Jerusalem / destruction of the temple. That's option number one. Option number two is it's the end of the age. Option number three is it's both. And to really answer this, I mean, it'll be interesting to see as we go through this chapter, how do our perspectives on this shift? I think really before making any kind of judgment on this, you wouldn't be able to do it just by verse 7. But we can only go at the pace that we're going at. So for now, I just raised those as those are some possibilities that will keep our ion, and again, in translation, you don't have to decide. So in other words, you're not translating this, the end of the temple is not yet. He doesn't say the temple. The end of the ages is not yet. He doesn't say that. The end of the temple in Jerusalem and all time is not yet. Again, he doesn't say that. Ta telos, very loaded word, open to interpretation, but I think in translation, just keep it as the end. I did not look at other passages, or I did not look at other translations on this, but I would guess that you would be hard pressed to find a translation that actually interpreted it beyond just the end. So you've got the end, the end, the end, the end, the end. Yeah, pretty consistent translation. The end shall not be yet. Yeah, if anyone has a translation that has anything other than the end, I would love to know about it. And I no sign of the end, and so that's Eugene Peterson. Yeah, so it looks like other translations have taken the same approach. All right, let's stop there, and we'll do questions the rest of the time. I anticipated as I was preparing that we would not get to verse 8, and I do want to welcome comments or questions here. We will start with verse 8 next time. I've put this in the handout just with the provisional translation, but in a way, it's a recapitulation of verse 7. Jesus will say, nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in multiple places. There will be famines. These are just the beginning of the birth pains. In other words, very similar. The end is not yet. These aren't the kind of signs that you're asking about that necessarily point to the destruction of the temple. At least I don't think. Again, I will work my way through this with you. But that's kind of an elaboration on verse 7 that we get to next time. As you take a moment to type any comments or questions you've got, I leave you with these two quotes here that are in the handout. Just a kind of common theme that I saw running through the commentaries, this idea that well, I shouldn't say the disciples, and maybe you identify as one, want to know the future. Jesus directs them unflinchingly to the present, and there's a running admonition against future speculation at the expense of present obedience. And again, there's this irony that it's hard for me to think of chapters that have led to more future speculation than this one. And here's France talking about the warning against premature expectation. You've got Blepete. Yeah, warned against the sort of superficial impressions of fulfillment, which have been the bane of students of apocalyptic and eschatological literature ever since. Jesus' disciples looking for fulfillment of his words about the destruction of the temple, they must be on their guard. All right, let's stop there. I want to take your questions. We'll pick this up next time. So let me get caught up. And if you've got a comment or question, yeah, great. Here, and so sorry, some of these took me a little while to get to, but yeah, somebody says, could signs be like prophecy? That is, they have two time ranges: an immediate temple destroyed and long-term fulfillment, end of days. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, I think that's possible. And you know, if you think about Christian interpretation of Hebrew prophetic literature, that often is at play. That yeah, there is a proximate fulfillment of this, and there's a more, we maybe say, eschatological or messianic fulfillment of it as well. And so that is a way of reading, a very accepted way of reading, interpreting, understanding prophecy, that it could be a both and. You know, that's not just a like, well, we don't really know, so it might be both. It's no, actually, we've studied this and we believe that both are at hand. Again, these questions will become at least a little bit clearer as we work our way through the rest of the passage. But I'm under no pretense that I'm going to figure out exactly when Mark 13 is talking about. Someone else says, likewise, the end has two time ranges, or same person, short and long, as Solomon was David's son and Messiah promised to David's long-term fulfillment. Yes, absolutely, well said. And let me put, oh good, someone adds an option 4. So if option 1 is Jerusalem, option 2 is end times, option 3 is both. Someone says option 4, Jesus clearly states none of these events in 5 through 8 are the end. Simple, ordinary human events, so don't be misled, disciples. Yep, telos will be defined by the immediate context in verses 8 and following will show further progression in this discourse. Great, very well said. That's a great place to end, and that's quite right. We're going to get, the question before us will be, is there something in what Jesus describes that's a little bit more maybe like historically identifiable that will help us answer that question? And if not, and even if so, what we'll keep doing is trying to translate as well as we can from Greek to English, raising more questions along the way. Thanks so much for great comments. I always walk away understanding the passage better because of you all, and I appreciate that. Let me end the recording here, and then I'll stay on for just another moment with those of you here live. But if you are watching on the recording, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to email me, abramkj@accordancebible.com. And again, this handout is at the tiny URL address shown on your screen.